Join the conversation in Tipperary. Contact us through Facebook, Twitter or email tiptoday@tippfm.com.
Now it's time to have a look at what's happening globally, and glad to be joined as usual by Thomas Conway of the Nina Guardian. Good morning to you, Thomas.
Good morning, Fran.
Good to see you. You've come sort of a roundabout way to the studio this morning. What's the weather like out there? What's it like on the roads?
It's pretty shocking. Yeah, it's dangerous enough, and obviously I would urge everyone to heed the advice of the authorities and to not dwell or to not foray out into it. It was pretty difficult driving en route down here. I was careful, obviously, but the biggest challenge was getting from the car to the door here.
Right, it's so windy.
Yeah. The door almost, if the studio could fall down now in the middle of our broadcast. It's very wild.
All right, okay, so be careful out there is the message. Let us begin with that national security strategy, Donald Trump's national security strategy. And what did you make of it? This happens during presidencies. It's released once a year, is it?
Yeah, it's released once. Every president releases a national security strategy. So once every term. Biden had one, Obama had two, and now this is Trump. And Trump had one, obviously, in his initial term. But this is his roadmap for how he sees the world. And ultimately, I suppose, I'm stating the obvious here, but it's Donald Trump's world, and we're all just living in it. And some of the aspects of this plan, it extends from American control over the Western Hemisphere, the West, as we might put it, greater supremacy in Latin America, South America. It tackles the ties between China and the States, and then obviously it looks at Ukraine and Europe. So it is riddled with inconsistencies, I will say that, but it puts out a broad vision for what Trump wants to do to the world, and in many cases he has already started, hasn't he?
Some brutal words for Europe, and we'll talk about that in just a little while, but the emphasis, as you say, on the Western Hemisphere. Yeah,
Trump, the Western Hemisphere is the sphere that we're living in, essentially, particularly America, Canada, and parts of Mexico and that. And Trump has an idea of American dominance of the Western Hemisphere. So he essentially dismisses the role for smaller countries, ones like Ireland, really, and believes in this might makes right vision of power. And that's what he lays out. He talks about a Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Now, the Monroe Doctrine was a kind of a notion set forth by President James Monroe in 1823.
It's a long time ago, wasn't it?
A long time ago, that the US will not tolerate any interference in the Western Hemisphere. So in the America's backyard, it wants nobody meddling in its affairs. And Trump kind of wants to extend that vision, and Rubio has talked about it as well. And he's talked about working more with the private sector to put, and I quote here, to promote strategic acquisition and investment opportunities for American companies in the region. So it's infused with the kind of language of America first.
And is there a notion that that's backed up by military prowess in some way?
Yeah, indeed. And I suppose Trump has made investing in the military a core part of his agenda. Investing in the military, investing in the police forces, But yeah, he effectively wants America to dominate its sphere, and it is the most powerful country on earth, both politically and militarily. So he's essentially just extending American dominance, but many would argue that time is long past. Like, we live in a multilateral world where you have different competing powers. There is no American dominance or hegemony anymore. But Trump is kind of trying to restore that, and that is exactly the vision he sets out in his national security strategy.
A lot of space on Latin America and the Caribbean and other neighbours of the US, Thomas. And
yeah.
I suppose that was to be expected, wasn't it?
It was, particularly in the wake of the recent military build-up in the Caribbean, on the shores of Venezuela, and his strikes in the Pacific targeting drug boats. And obviously his Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, is caught up in a major controversy around that, concerning, whether he ordered extrajudicial killings in the Pacific. But a lot of Latin American, particularly the left wing, the socialist leaders, the likes of Maduro who is obviously of the hard left in Venezuela, and Gustavo Petro in Colombia, who would be a little bit kind of more moderate in his vision, but they have condemned Trump. But I've heard other reports suggesting that greater American influence in the region would actually be welcomed, because there is a lot of, within some countries anyway, there is, they do not have good relations with the likes of Venezuela. Venezuela is seen as a model for how not to run a country. Something like 4 million have fled the country. There was a humanitarian crisis there over recent years. Maduro stole an election, and they see the idea of Trump coming in and toppling him almost as a good thing. But it's still, it doesn't sit well with me, and I'm no fan of Maduro, but the notion of America coming in and intervening in a foreign country.
Right. And what is the possibility there? A right-wing puppet government or some kind, is it?
Well, I think so. And they would point to Maria Corina Machado, the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, who is the natural opposition candidate to Maduro in Venezuela, even though she was not allowed to run at the last election. They put in another guy in place of her. But she would be the natural kind of replacement for Maduro, and I suppose it is an American-friendly puppet government. So you go from kind of a hard left socialist government, which is very resentful towards America, towards a friendlier regime, and then there's the question of oil. There, Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the globe, but they're not exploiting them, and the US wants a share of that.
It always comes back to the oil, doesn't it?
Oil and money.
What's he saying about China and Taiwan, though? Because the language is kind of, it's careful enough, is it?
It's careful enough. They were judicious in terms of, their language around this. It's a little bit softer. But, it doesn't get away from the fact that most US lawmakers, most senators and representatives would see China as the biggest long-term threat to the United States, to American dominance. And it is, we've two superpowers really in the world, and they're America and China. And that's illustrated by the size of China's economy.
But they both need each other.
Yeah, they're intertwined.
Yeah.
They're intertwined. Their economies, and they both need each other. So as you said, the language is very careful. It says trade with China should be balanced and focused on non-sensitive factors. It even calls for maintaining a genuinely mutually advantageous economic relationship with Beijing. So that points to a certain level of friendliness almost.
And Taiwan?
Yeah, that's the really interesting bit. It advocates for a maintenance of the status quo around Taiwan. So we've wondered on this programme, and many people have wondered, would Trump jump to Taiwan's aid in the event of a Chinese invasion? He didn't say he would, and he didn't say he wouldn't really here. He has said that he wants a maintenance of the status quo in the Taiwan Strait, in the Indo-Pacific more broadly. So he's kind of playing down the prospect of any Chinese invasion. Now, China, for their part, have said they will be ready to invade by 2027. Their military is constantly launching provocations in the South China Sea and in Taiwan's kind of sphere. So the language from an American perspective is quite careful in that regard.
Let's take it to Ukraine and Europe then. What's he saying about Ukraine?
Yeah, and this is obviously increasingly relevant because of what has happened in Europe and what has happened in Ukraine over the past few days. Obviously, the European leaders in Downing Street yesterday, the whole notion of Zelensky is to look at a revised peace plan. That's the news this morning. But the document says that it is a core interest of the US to negotiate an expeditious, a quick cessation of hostilities in Ukraine. Now, Trump obviously does not have warm words for Zelensky. He is not fond of him, and he made reference to that in recent days. He said he hasn't even read the peace plan. But previous American presidents, Republicans in particular, Reagan, would be turning in his grave if he saw the language used towards Russia. It is quite friendly towards Russia, and it fundamentally changes kind of the relationship with them. But it also, from a European perspective, talks about correcting Europe's current trajectory.
That's very interesting.
That's the most provocative line.
Is that making reference to immigration and cultural changes within Europe? Is that?
I think so. Obviously, Trump wants to promote familiar politicians, so the kind of right-wing, hard right version of power, conservative politicians. He's fond of Meloni. He's fond of Orbán, obviously, in Hungary. And anyone that doesn't conform with that, with his idea of politics, is under threat, really. And I think that's what he's talking about when he's talking about correcting Europe's trajectory. He wants a Europe of more independent nations. Doesn't like the EU, obviously, as he has said previously in the past. And he speaks about, civilizational erasure, things like that. Like that is an obvious reference to migration and immigration. And it is obviously an issue across Europe. But Trump is putting forward his solution.
He does say, however, though, that a core interest is mitigating the risk of Russian confrontation with countries in Europe.
Yeah, so he puts that in there. I would suggest that Rubio had that line put in. Rubio is probably the most hawkish member of the the Trump administration when it comes to Russia, and would be sceptical of them. So he kind of, it's balanced. It's a 33-page document in full. It's quite extensive.
You said at the top there were inconsistencies. What did you mean, Thomas?
I mean, like, there are inconsistencies. It says, like, the US should have a high bar for foreign intervention, but it also says it wants to prevent the emergence of dominant adversaries. Now, that to me doesn't really makes sense.
Yeah.
The US is talking about, looking after its own internal affairs and not intervening, and yet it is very clearly intervening in the politics of a lot of countries.
For certain.
Be it Argentina, be it Venezuela, etc. And then, as I mentioned earlier on, it dismisses the ambitions of many smaller countries. And this is particularly worrying from an Irish perspective. Like, I do wonder, like, Micheál Martin had that traumatic experience in Washington the last time. It went relatively well, but I do wonder over the course of the next 3 years, will that St. Patrick's Day meeting be preserved? I think most.
Well, you're suspicious it might not be.
Well, I think it will be. Ireland has come under fire in the US. There are a number, opinion articles in the newspapers, particularly vis-a-vis our stance on.
And Irish America is not as influential as it used to be.
It is waning, and that is just the reality of time. There's a new generation of immigrants in America. But yeah, so I think Ireland's position, we have to use our diplomatic influence in America to preserve that relationship, irrespective of how Trump acts.
I was following Putin's visit to India, and I was intrigued at the warmth of the welcome.
Yeah, it really was. It was a luxurious welcome.
Wasn't it just?
Yeah, and this is typical, really, of when big powers meet. There's a degree of splendour to it, and they bring out all the pomp and pageantry. They dined on something like Indian winter superfoods, a vegetarian menu, apparently. I don't know how that would have sat with Putin. But that's what they did, and loads of pomp and pageantry. But the real nuts and bolts would have happened there was an informal dinner between Putin and Modi towards the end of the summit. And that's when issues such as predominantly trade and oil would have been raised, because trade and oil are, as we've discussed many times, propping up the Russian economy. And India
purchasing from
Russian Russian crude and Russian exports. The current and actually the figures for trade between the two countries, they have a current trade volume of 68.7 billion. That's the value of trade between Russia and India now in 2025. In 2020, it was 8.1 billion.
Wow.
So that's 5-6 times,
It's interesting, isn't it? India has to be very careful here in terms of balancing between Washington and Moscow.
Yeah,
doesn't it?
India is walking a tightrope. Modi has to, and Trump was once a fan of Modi. He brought him to rallies in his first term and everything, but he has become increasingly annoyed with him because India is purchasing Russian oil and propping up the Russian economy. So he has to be careful. India still does a lot of trade. India is an emerging superpower, it should be said. It's the world's largest population, one of the world's largest economies, and it's growing. But I mean, the optics. I mean, there was a warm hug at the airports. The leaders gave remarks, and India is facing 50% tariffs from Washington.
But they're looking for it to be armed from Russia, are they not?
Yeah, they're looking at purchasing weapons and that. and that will obviously that would be a fill up for Russia's economy to boost its war finances.
But how could they spare the weaponry when they're at war in Ukraine?
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense. But I guess you need as much money as possible to run or to compete in a war. And to go back to what the Europeans were meeting about in London yesterday, that was all about a reparations loan for Ukraine to finance it for the next few years, both the country and its armed forces. I mean, Russia and Ukraine both need money, because to fight a war you need lots of money. We see lots of the attacks are taking place with drones.
Yes.
And they're sophisticated weaponry, sophisticated technology. And expensive.
Yeah.
It has to be financed somehow.
Interesting. Syria celebrating a year of liberation, but it's uneasy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. There are cracks beginning to appear. I mean, we're a year and a day to that kind of momentous moment in Damascus when Assad fled. And Ahmed al-Sharaa became the new leader of Syria, and in many ways he's now president. He's doing well on an international front. He's a friend of Trump.
Well, considering that he was considered to be a terrorist at one stage.
He doesn't come from great stock. I mean, he was a member of Al-Qaeda, there was a splinter, and he led his group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham to dominance in the province of Idlib, and they eventually took the country. Now, he's doing well on the international front. Syria has had sanctions lifted by the United States. That's a major boost. As I said, he's friendly with Trump. He's friendly with the Saudi Arabian Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. So he's making all the right moves and all the right plays. But, and there is a big but here, things are not well at home. I mean,
for minorities,
particularly for minorities. Yeah. There have been two egregious acts of violence this year. One in March against the Druze community, against the Alawite community. And Bashar al-Assad would have been an Alawite. They're a sect of Sunni Islam. There were horrendous recriminations in which there were many deaths. And then there was kind of a repeat of that violence against the Druze, which are kind of an esoteric ethnic group, kind of a unique ethnic group in Syria's kind of mosaic of different ethnicities. There were recriminations against them, and there were killings. So that does not bode well for the fate of minorities in Syria.
What about the Christians in Syria? Because I hear very little talk about that.
Yeah, no, there hasn't been any large-scale obliterations or whatever you want to call it. But there is a Christian minority population in Syria, and it is it's in their interests that al-Sharaa governs the country inclusively. I mean, I was speaking to a journalist who wrote a book, Stephen Starr. He's from Kilowan, and he's a journalist in the States now, but he wrote a book on Syria. He lived there from 2013 during the civil war years. So he wrote a book on Assad. He said that the country, is improving steadily, and there is a bright path ahead for Syria if al-Sharaa, the president, can bring it on the right course. And as I say there, he pretty much reiterated that he's making the right moves internationally, but certainly from a domestic perspective, there are a lot of cracks, and their economy is not holding up. Many people are poor, or just as poor as they were a year ago. And that is obviously... that will be a letdown, because there was jubilation on the streets a year ago.
Yeah, but even though the sanctions are relaxed, the people aren't seeing anything from that.
No, and I suspect these things will take time. There are other factors too. A lot of civil servants have been put out of work. Assad obviously employed a lot of people in his regime. And al-Sharaa has cut down on those jobs and stuff like that. But there's still a look of one-man rule there, and that's what I'd be kind of sceptical of. I mean,
the future of democracy?
Yeah, I don't think there is a future of democracy in the near future for Syria, I would think.
All right, can we have, because also in the news, Germany and that pension reform bill, what's happening there?
Yeah, Friedrich Merz has had a busy few days. He was in London yesterday. Over the weekend, he made a visit to Israel, which was contentious. He kind of affirmed Germany's support for Israel. And whatever you think of Israel, it's significant enough for him. I read an article the week before last in the Irish Times. His grandfather was a Nazi, So, he openly wept in a synagogue.
War guilt.
War guilt and stuff like that. But to go back to the pension reform bill, this was a contentious pension reform bill that was passed in Germany's parliament last Friday. A group of young MPs from Merz's own party, the Christian Democratic Union, had threatened to oppose the bill. Now, it eventually went through, but it hinted at kind of fractures within his own movement, and he needs to keep his own party together. He's in a coalition with the Social Democratic Party. It's hard enough to keep a coalition together of two parties. He needs to keep his own party on side. So he has a lot going on, doing well abroad. At home, not so much.
All right. In Sudan, then,
Yeah.
well, what's happening there?
I wanted to mention this because there are terrible atrocities being committed more or less weekly in Sudan now. A doctors group has said that a drone attack by the Rapid Support Forces, they're one side of the Sudanese civil war, their paramilitary group, has killed 50 people, including 33 children. Wow. Now, that's at a kindergarten in the southern town of Kaloji. So that is a horrendous, that's a war crime, full stop.
Yeah.
It's taking place kind of near the Darfur region of Western Sudan, and really appalling crime. The Rapid Support Forces seem to be increasingly culpable of these, and they're being funded by the United Arab Emirates, by money from there. There's kind of a flow of gold.
It's a strange mix in that organisation. I mean, there's mercenaries in there.
Yeah, indeed. There's kind of a variety of different groups working on their behalf.
Yeah, it's an awful atrocity, and this is some of the stuff that is not making the front pages and the headlines as well. America's Supreme Court. Yeah,
this will be of interest to everyone, I think, because it impacts everyone. America's Supreme Court said it would rule on the legality of Donald Trump's attempt to end birthright citizenship. So that's part of his anti-immigration agenda. Birthright citizenship is a right in the United States, a constitutional right under the 14th Amendment. It was introduced after the Civil War in order to protect the children of slaves, which grants citizenship to anyone born on American soil. And I mean, you'll know, like, I have many friends who were parents were in America, they were born in America, and therefore they are American citizens.
Yes.
Trump wants to end that. Now, the US isn't the only country in the world. I think there's about 30 which have this legal and constitutional right, but it would be, as well as being hugely symbolic, it would materially affect the lives of a lot of people across America. And now there won't be a decision on it until midway through next year. But the fact that the Supreme Court, which is weighted in favour of the conservative, is more conservative justices than liberals, you'd be inclined to say, they might just support Trump's move and end birthright citizenship, which would be massive.
Well, it'd be massive indeed, and as you say, where Ireland is concerned, it would have a massive effect, I would imagine, on Irish Americans. Thanks for that, Tom. It's a pleasure as always, and great to see you. And safe journey home, which is the main thing. News and information's on the way.
Tipp FM's Tipp Today.
With Slattery's Garage, puck on. It's time to change. Test drive the award-winning range of Peugeot hybrids and fully electric vehicles at Slattery's Garage today. See slatterysgarage.ie.